I oversee the wellness program, which I actually believe I got to share with you all about in an earlier session for about mental health. So I've been at St. Andrews now going on my fourth year. And prior to St. Andrews, I was in private practice in Austin, Texas. And then prior to that, my previous career was working in business and yoga, which was an interesting combination. So. And I'm an alum of St. Andrews. I always forget that part. I graduated in 2008.
And my name's Greg Guldin, so I'm the Dean of Student Affairs, and this is my fourth year at St. Andrews. Lizzie and I kind of came in at the same time, and I work with Lizzie and others to make sure that we've got a really strong student culture, particularly through the residential life and the student life on weekend activities and advisory programs, and that sort of thing. But Lizzie and I and Danica Danica Tisdale Fisher work really closely on what we'll talk about with you today, which involves some of what we consider our wholeness programming. So, what our students need outside of the classroom to make sure they're flourishing in every way, not just as scholars and not just as athletes and artists, but just as young people who have a lot to learn and want to be their best versions of themselves while they're here. So we try to do everything we can with the time we've got, and we enjoy every opportunity we have. So I will spend a little bit of time talking about what we now call In Day. If you've heard about that, we already had it this year. Um, so In Day is really a day that we started maybe 3 years ago with a curriculum known as One Love. One Love is an organization that was founded years ago by a family. Their daughter's name was Yardley Love, and so she was a lacrosse player at the University of Virginia. And unfortunately, due to relationship abuse and violence, she ultimately lost her life. And the story goes, she lost her life to her boyfriend at the time. And the story goes that there were signs and indicators all along the way, all while they were dating and seeing each other, that would have indicated that the relationship was unhealthy. And if people had simply spoken up or had the tools to be able to identify the signs of those unhealthy relationships or what a healthy relationship looks like, that death could have been avoided. And so this foundation came out with this curriculum where they've got presentations and videos and all kinds of resources for us to use. But one of the most powerful things that they do is they provide it to us at no cost and in huge volumes. So we can actually empower our students to be the ones running those seminars. And so what we did is we have about 28 juniors and seniors who are student leaders. We call them in-day facilitators. And we go through a training with them where they watch some of these videos that we choose for the students to watch holistically. And Lizzie and I will run conversations with them about the content of those videos and facilitate what a meeting might look like. And then we talk with them about, okay, how can we take this content, make sure that we're getting it to the students at St. Andrews, both holistically as young people, but also in a way that speaks to them as St. Andrews students here at St. Andrews in Middletown. And so we spend a full day or 2 half days, one half day watching the videos and talking about what the videos entail, and then the other half day putting that to practice here, where, okay, how does that play out on campus here? So this year, what we did with the ninth graders is we actually introduced them. One Love has 10 signs of a healthy relationship and 10 signs of an unhealthy relationship. And so with the ninth graders, we had them go through all of those signs. So we kind of introduced them to the 10 signs of the healthy and unhealthy. And then they talked about them a little bit, and they actually were introduced to them through social media and through clips of television shows to make it a little bit more enjoyable and connectable for them. And then the junior and senior facilitators had them actually make their own skits with those 10 signs of healthy and unhealthy relationships being demonstrated. So they filmed their own skits as a class and they could watch each other perform them. And so that was what we did with the ninth graders. The 10th graders watched a series of videos on one of them was what's called behind the post. So the video really tries to highlight what is going on when students are interacting with each other through social media as opposed to face to face. And so you see these conversations or you hear these conversations happening, and then when you actually see the people come into the screen, they are behind their phones. They're not actually talking to each other. But it gets the kids to talk about, well, what does it really mean? How do we really interact with each other in this increasing digital world, but at a place like St. Andrews that values face-to-face interaction? And then we also introduce them to another video that talks about how to be in good friendship with each other. So One Love doesn't just focus on romantic or interpersonal relationships, it also focuses on friendships and relationships with your family and your siblings and all kinds of other really important relationships that a student may find themselves in, and how to manage those relationships, right? What happens when a relationship makes you feel good or bad, or how do you interpret what somebody else's needs are, or set boundaries of your own, all kinds of things. And so that was the other video we watched with the fourth form, to really get them thinking about how they're in community with each other here at St. Andrews. And then the fifth and sixth form actually watched a video called Escalation, which is the Yardley Love story, which is a pretty intense video where they show the relationship at the very early stages where it looked like the ideal relationship. And then, of course, the ending is what I've already mentioned. And so then we have a conversation with the students about, okay, not just what would it be like to be in that relationship, but what would it be like to be the friend of somebody in a relationship like that? And how do you find the language or find the moment to really provide support for them, or ac- acknowledge and recognize you may not have the tools to support that friend that are needed. So what are the tools that you can access or that you can make use of, which is some of the time that we spent with them too. One Love has national hotlines and resources. We, of course, remind them of the resources here at St. Andrews, including the counseling office, their coaches, their advisors, dorm parents, every adult in the school. And so we did that this year for the first time early in September so that we have this language and we have these ideas to access all through the year and to build on year after year. So the kids can now talk to each other about what those signs look like, or can say, you know what, I never actually thought that I was in an unhealthy relationship, but after seeing that video, I think something was up there. And it really gets them to start identifying and talking about and thinking about and preparing for what it means to be in positive relationship with each other, whether that be interpersonal, friendships, family members, and everything in between. So um, we call it In Day because it's actually spelled out Saints, Saints, and since in is in the middle, it's In Day, and it's because in is in the middle of the word saints, and so we're talking about ourselves and that kind of a thing. So that's a little bit about what we do with the relationship day. And I know Lizzie's going to talk about another organization that we bring to campus to work with the kids. But before we get there, if anybody has questions specific to One Love or In Day, both Lizzie and I are really in tune with that and can help answer or talk through whatever's on your mind.
Yeah, I also the one thing that I think Greg, you also made sure to highlight in our facilitator training, that I thought was really helpful for a lot of students. Especially like I've mentioned, I'm one of the teachers for the wellness course, and so we kind of get to hit this again in wellness with the sophomores, for a couple classes. And one of the things that they said in a couple of our sections was that In-Day helped them identify the difference between an unhealthy relationship and separating that from an unhealthy person. And that there oftentimes is this idea that the kids previously would just assume like, oh, well, that person's just a bad person to date, or that person's like just not a good friend, and got them thinking a little bit more specifically of like, maybe this dynamic specifically is unhealthy, or maybe specifically there are unhealthy elements, but that the person themselves is not like a bad human being. And it kind of it just gave them a little bit of reorientation. So that was something that I think the 10 signs of a healthy and unhealthy relationship gave a lot of our kids access to, that I don't know they had access to before. So I'll just add that. Yeah. Any questions or Anything that y'all have heard, we're happy to answer.
And then what's cool about it too is that the in-day facilitators, the 28 juniors and seniors, are self-nominated, so they're kids who are expressing interest because they want to be able to lead their peers through these conversations. We if it wasn't clear, we divide the whole school up into small 10-person groups or so, so the conversations are happening in small groups, and they're watching the same videos, but in classrooms all over campus.
Mhm.
And the kids, the facilitators, then are sought after by other students after the
Mhm.
actual seminar day, oftentimes by the kids that they led, just because they're now seen as resources for, how can I deal with this friendship or this issue that's popped up? Which, of course, being in a fully residential school, there's a lot of just relationship building and learning that happens in every moment. So it's really important for our students to have both their adult mentors, but also their peer mentors who can help them navigate some of these challenges that they're going to experience over time.
Yeah,
Okay. Lizzie, do you want to talk a little bit about learning courage?
there we go. Yes. So one of the other programs that we've also added is through this nonprofit, Learning Courage. And Learning Courage is an organization that works primarily with K through 12th independent schools. And they have a specialty focusing on boarding school workshops, education, audit. And their work actually was really grounded in and evolved from prevention of sexual misconduct, specifically from power dynamics. So specifically, whether it be like adult to child or there being like an age power dynamic. So that's what the work that they do originated. And then, over the many years that they've been working with schools, it's evolved into what we've really used them for, which is educating and giving tools and knowledge around what are the either day to day or maybe slightly less common, but more typical than maybe sexual assault, boundary violations, or unhealthy communication, or kind of like toxic culture, um, just kind of those more day-to-day things that aren't quite at the total red flag that a lot of times kids know what to do if they're like, we know what we would need to do if there was sexual misconduct or if there was a sexual assault or sexual abuse. So like we know what to do with that. Um, and they also are like, we feel pretty comfortable handling like, you know, my roommate borrowed my dress and didn't ask, and so I need to tell her that like violated my boundary. I don't like that. So they're pretty good on either end of the spectrums. But what we found is that students really struggled with those kind of lower level boundary violations. So we brought in Learning Courage. I guess this is our third year working with them. Um, and all of the people who present have either attended boarding school or worked at boarding school. So again, they know what a St. Andrews student might be facing. And some of the work that they really get onto immediately is boundaries. They talk about the different kinds of boundaries. We have relational boundaries, we have emotional boundaries, we have physical boundaries, we have intellectual boundaries, we have power boundaries. And so they try to get kids thinking about the different ways in which they can set boundaries. And then the other thing that they start to pivot to is asking the kids to identify what stops you or it prevents you from setting boundaries. And it's going to be different from each relationship, so like the thing that gets you to, maybe bite your tongue in your rooming dynamic might be different than what maybe prevents you from setting a boundary with someone you're in a romantic relationship with. But giving, especially for the freshmen and the sophomores, giving them some very clear examples of like, they struggle with confrontation, they're people pleasers, a lot of kids brought up this idea this year that St. Andrews has a culture of nice. And so while that's really sweet and wonderful, it also can be then hard to set a boundary because then if you're the kid who is constantly a stick in the mud, that could impact your either social standing or maybe likability, which again, us as adults zooming way out, we would kind of be able to say and help them see that actually standing true to who you are actually often makes you more likable. But in this kind of like culture of nice, that they kind of get those things mixed up. So learning courage spends a lot of time really getting kids to think about and talk about and pair and share out into the room. What are your different boundaries? What are the things that prevent you from setting boundaries? As Greg kind of mentioned with in day, again, one of the big things that we just uniquely face is we're 100% boarding. And so the rate at which kids are around each other and even around adults, is just so much more than in any other environment, in the country. So it's really got its own unique challenges, and relationships can intensify in ways that are positive, and they can also escalate in ways that maybe aren't so healthy. And so trying to get kids to um, build that inner like intuition, which is like an actual like muscle that we have to build and we have to exercise, and getting them to kind of identify like, oh, there's a gut feeling, oh, that doesn't sit too well with me. Getting them to really pay attention to that is actually it's a life skill. It's not just something that you're either good at it or you're not. It's something that your brain actually has to learn to trust, and you learn to trust it by recognizing it, building awareness to it, and then deciding to act or not act on it. So they tried to help kids understand this idea of intuition, and that kind of like that gut feeling. And then we talked with both groups around grooming, which we spoke mostly about it from the lens of like grooming in an adult to like child relationship, mostly to give them information. I think that we are very blessed at St. Andrews to not have had these issues. And again, because we are 100% boarding, some of the kids, like, we want them to be able to identify if something doesn't sit right with their gut, that they can speak up. And so maybe not necessarily at St. Andrews, but maybe in another context, or maybe in college, or maybe if they have a friend who's going through something, um, with a different adult, we want them to be able to understand that, a lot of times the relationships they get to experience at St. Andrews are not always the ones that they're going to get to experience in kind of the outside world. And so being able to identify these different steps of grooming, which again come from power dynamics, they come from um, usually it's someone who's pretty well liked in the community, very charismatic, that there is a form of either isolation or low self-esteem, on behalf of the student. Oftentimes there's some sort of like emotional manipulation, and that ultimately it can end in, like sexual misconduct, and exploitation. And so kind of bringing that up to the kids, also just to give them information. Just because they may not be experiencing it doesn't mean that they shouldn't understand what it means, because unfortunately it's something that exists in intimate communities. um, and so we want our kids to just be prepared. um, so that's always an interesting part of our relationship conversations, because the kids are like, what do you mean, like grooming? Like I spend time with, like my advisor. I get in the car and we go to Starbucks, and like, yeah, I was alone in the car with them. That's fine. Like they don't even think about it, And like we don't either. We've talked with so many people about it. We're like, it's good. It's okay. It's part of our culture. It's a norm. But it's so interesting that getting the kids to kind of think about these things. So anyway, so I'll digress from grooming. It's always my least favorite topic because it kind of breaks my heart. The last week that we do talk about with primarily juniors and seniors, because one of the big things that we talk about, and Greg, as one of the form advisors, and Kristen Hansel, as one of the other form advisors, spend a lot of time with the seniors on, is that they are primary culture setters. Our seniors are, with or without a title on your resume or on the back of your shirt, you are a leader. And our juniors are learning these skills, honing these skills in preparation of senior year. And so with that comes a lot of responsibility, but with that comes power and influence. And so Learning Courage tries to offer the students a chance to identify what's the difference between influence, what's the difference between influence and power. What are your different roles? If you do have influence and power, where does that come from? How can it be used for good in culture creation? And how can it actually be a detriment to culture creation? So the juniors and seniors, they did a really good job. I got to sit in on the session, of course, this year, and it was interesting hearing a pretty even blend, but actually a lot of juniors were speaking up, which the seniors were definitely offering their insights in the session about what it was like being a leader. But it was really cool to hear some of the juniors offering what they would do when they're going to be seniors, or how they would want to respond to certain dynamics and situations where they know that they're the one who would have power in the dynamic or in the scenario. So that was really cool to hear. It gave me some excitement for seeing where our juniors go next year. Um, and then the last thing that they always talk about within Learning Courage, specifically for the fifth and sixth form, so juniors and seniors, is pretty much what to do in times of a disclosure. Again, because we are in a closed setting, and because it's not only normal, but it's appropriate and actually important for students to start to learn how to speak peer to peer. They're supposed to go from this level of dependence, during your elementary and middle school ages, to interdependence, which is kind of your adolescent period, and then eventually, once they're an adult, go into independence. But like they're in this middle murky phase of trying to be both peer to peer and peer to adult. So we want them to learn how to disclose to one another things that are appropriate. And if a student ever discloses to another student something that is above their pay grade, or something that is really not appropriate for that student to manage, wanting to give them both some clarity, again, some boundaries of here are the things that you do not need and should not handle: self-harm, suicidality, substance use, sexual abuse, any kind of abuse. Um, you know, those are all things that they really, really concerning, like panic attacks association, like all of that needs to go directly to an adult. Um, and so, but if it's not one of those things and you do feel comfortable being in those peer-to-peer conversations, here are the ways to really provide good listening, support, reassurance, care. And so that's something that Learning Courage gave some, they have a lovely acronym. I have it, CARE. It's well named. Um, and so they have this great little acronym that helps students hopefully remember how to be a good caregiver. So that's Learning Courage. We did it earlier this year as well, with the intention of having a lot of our interpersonal programming done before even winter break, so that as we have other, whether it's residential programming, or um, if it's any sort of other like interpersonal opportunities to check in with students or different grades, that we'd have these infrastructures, or kind of these foundations to be able to pull from throughout the whole year. So we can pull from, hey, remember when we talked about the 10 unhealthy relationships, manipulation? What's going on here? So we can pull from that. And in the same way of, kind of pushing them and asking, like, okay, what's happening with the power dynamics here, you know, on this dorm? Why is this conflict happening? We have that language, we have that framework that we can work with students on, while they also manage all of the other many, many hats that they're wearing. So I'll pause there. I would imagine that was a lot of information. But if you have questions, or just even comments or things that it sparked, I'd love to hear them.